Hello, and welcome to Folklore and Superstition, where we tell folk tales, legends, ghost stories, and monster myths from around the world. I'm your host, Cassie, co-host of Mythillogical, and today we'll be taking a journey to the Isle of Man, a small island located in the Irish Sea, to tell the story of a type of helpful fairy, or brownie, called the Fenodyree. Sadly, we overlooked the Isle of Man in our fairies episode of Mythological, which I hope we can be forgiven for, considering the sheer size of that episode, just covering Ireland, Wales, Scotland, and Anglo-Saxon England. One thing I aim to do with this series is to cover things that didn't make the cut for Mythological, either by being too small a topic, or because we couldn't fit a story into a relevant episode. So you can expect to hear more from places like the Isle of Man in the future. Historically, the Isle of Man has been inhabited by Gaelic peoples since around the 5th century AD, with migration from Ireland displacing its native population. Norse influence came in the 9th century, when Vikings conquered the island and incorporated it into the Kingdom of the Isles, with Orkney, Shetland, and the Hebrides, before being sold to Scotland in the 13th century. The island would later become a crown dependency under the English and later the British crown, remaining a crown dependency to this day. Despite the Irish origins of its people and the influences of Norway and Scotland, Sir John Rhys notes a significant amount of similarity in Manx folklore with that of Wales, discussed in detail in his book Celtic Folklore, Welsh and Manx. The creature I'll be telling you about today, however, seems to be influenced by all four of these cultures. The Fenodyree, or Fenodyree, to give the two pronunciations listed by Rhys, is a Manx variant of the brownie seen in Scotland, Orkney and Ireland, or the bubach seen in Wales. Arthur William Moore, in his 1891 book The Folklore of the Isle of Man, also points out aspects of the Scandinavian troll in the appearance of the Fenodyree, noting the ugly, beast-like appearance and his prodigious strength. In stature and behaviour, however, the Fenodyree is most similar to the brownies known in Scotland, being around 2 feet tall, and most often found performing household or farm tasks. In all stories, the Fenodyree appears naked, and his hatred of clothes is an important element in some. Unlike brownies, the Fenodyree appears to have been an individual, rather than a species. Moore tells an origin story for the Fenodyree, while Rhys points out that no story refers to multiple Fenodyree, and of the two locations where his stories are set, Colby in the south and Concan or Oncan near Douglas both share the same narratives. Of the origin of the Fenodyree, Moore quotes a story told by a Mrs. E. S. Craven Green. The Fenodyree was once an elfin knight who fell in love with a nymph who lived in a home beneath the blue tree of Glen Alden, a valley on the northeast of the isle. He promised to leave the fairy court to marry her and live in Alden with her, and so was absent from the court during the celebration of Riholis Vor in Ar, the Royal High Harvest Festival, in Glen Rushen. The elfin king was so offended by his absence that he was banished from the fairy court and cursed with an undying existence in the Manx Mountains in the form of a satyr, and so transformed into this ugly creature, he became a sad, lonely wanderer and was known as the Fenodyree. To some, the Fenodyree was a frightening figure. One night, he came to a mill at Glen Garra, and seeing light, he stuck his large head through the open door to inquire inside. The miller's wife screamed in fright upon seeing him. However, she quickly gathered her wits, grabbed a sieve, and offered to bake him a cake if he would gather water from the river in the sieve for her. She promised him that the more water he fetched, the bigger a cake she would bake him. The Fenodyree took the sieve and ran to the river, but of course he could not hold any water in it. In a rage, he threw the sieve into the river, crying, "Sieve, sieve, dash! The more I put in, the more there's going out." He returned to the mill to find that the woman had fled, while he was distracted, and the mill was dark. Other tales, though, show the Fenodyree as a hard worker to those who are not afraid of him. He would come to the parish of Marone, the only landlocked parish on the island, and would work to cut down and gather meadow grass that would have been damaged by coming storms. Anyone ungrateful or dissatisfied with his work, however, suffered punishment. One farmer accused the Fenodyree of not cutting his grass close enough to the ground, and the following year the Fenodyree told him to cut his own grass, only to follow him and rapidly dig up the roots behind him, nearly cutting the farmer's legs off with his spade. For several years no one was willing to mow the meadow, until one soldier brave enough made the attempt. He cut the field in a spiral pattern, out from the centre, so he was constantly turning to see the Fenodyree behind him and avoid his harassment. Elsewhere, the Fenodyree's efforts were better appreciated, particularly in the parish of Brede, where he was known to be able to harvest 2 whole fields of corn with a sickle in a single night, and would regularly find lost sheep. He would also live on Radcliffe's farm in Gordon, near Glenmay on the west coast, harvesting their corn and grinding it all overnight. This story tells us more of the nature of the Fenodyree, describing 2 conversations between him and the farmer. One cold day, as they were working in the fields, the farmer was blowing on his fingers. The Fenodyree asked why he did this, and the farmer explained it was to warm his fingers. That night, the Fenodyree saw the farmer blowing on his hot porridge, and when asked why, explained it was to cool it. The Fenodyree did not like this, finding it strange that a creature could blow hot and blow cold with one breath. In the final tale, the Fenodyree was encountered on Snaefell Mountain, the highest peak on the isle. A man had planned to build his home in Thaltywil Glen, on the lower slopes of Snaefell, and planned for the stone to be quarried by the beach. However, one block of white stone, which he particularly liked for his building, could not be moved even with the strength of all the men in the parish. However, overnight, the white stone and the other 100 cartloads of stone required were delivered to the building site by the Fenodyree. The man wished to pay the Fenodyree for his work, and so left a set of clothes for him. The Fenodyree, finding the gift, examined each one by one and expressed his dislike. Cap for the head, alas, poor head. Coat for the back, alas, poor back. Breeches for the breech, alas, poor breech. If these all be thine, then cannot be the merry glen of Rushen. After uttering these words, the Fenodyree departed with a wail, never to be seen again. It was said that you may hear his voice on the desert hill when the mountain winds have power. 'Tis a wild lament of his buried love and his long-lost fairy bower. Those who remembered the Fenodyree would go on to say that there has not been a merry world since he lost his ground. Two main sources went into this narrative for the Fenodyree. The Fenodyree of Gordon, as told in Manx Fairy Tales by Sophia Morrison in 1911, and the accounts given in Chapter 4 of the Folklore of the Isle of Man by Arthur William Moore in 1891. There isn't really a chronology in Moore's work. 2 of the stories told by Morrison do follow on from each other, but the rest don't seem connected. The stories told by Moore at least give a clear origin and a clear conclusion, so I have ordered the other accounts in between them in the way that fits the most naturally to me. I've left out a few stories and descriptions that didn't really fit neatly, or contradicted other stories. Morrison also tells a similar account of the Fenodyree being offered clothes as the one told by Moore. However, in this account, it is the farmer of Gordon offering the Fenodyree clothes out of pity in the winter, despite the Fenodyree's claims that he never feels the cold. This version gives a longer speech in response to being given the clothes. Coat for the back is sickness for the back. Vest for the middle is bad for the middle. Breeches for the breech is a curse for the breech. Cap for the head is injurious for the head. If thou own big Gordon farm, boy, if thine this little glen east, and thine this little glen west, not thine the merry glen of Rushen yet, boy. The Fenodyree flings the clothes away and leaves the farm, but rather than disappearing for good, he walked to Glen Rushen and begins to work for a man named Julian Moore Cleary. For Cleary, the Fenodyree works cutting his meadows and minding his sheep, and is again known to have found lost sheep in storms. On one occasion, due to the storm, he mistakes a large hare for a young brown sheep, telling Cleary that it gave him more trouble than the rest, fleeing twice around Burial Mountain before it could be caught. Here, the Fenodyree is also said to have a wife, and to have left Cleary to live at the top of Burial Mountain with her. Whether she is the nymph in the origin story given by More or not is not specified. However, they are said to have had an argument over a pot of porridge, so bad that she left him. In anger, he threw a huge white rock at her, striking her on the heel. Her blood was said to still stain the stone to this day. As she bound her wound, he pelted her with small rocks before she fled to the Lag River. He then threw a rock with the pot stick in it, which is also said to still be in the Lag River. Then she leapt clean over the Irish Sea to the mountains of Mourne in Ulster, where she remained from that day on. Of the origins of the Fenodyree, Sir John Rees suggests a possible Norse origin. He discusses the etymology of the name, which is defined in the Manx dictionary as one who has hair for stockings. The name, he says, is a combination of the Celtic finny, meaning hair, and the Manx oshir, meaning stocking, which is descended from the Old Norse hosa. He also gives an alternative etymology of the first half of the word, suggesting it could also be from the Swedish fjun, meaning down, as in fine or soft hair. He also makes comparison with the folk tales of the Hob or Roundcap in Yorkshire and Lincolnshire, formerly part of the Danelaw, as well as the Danish Nis, which has a similar story of finding lost sheep for a farmer and bringing a hare home with them. Norse origin or not, the Fenodyree can be considered a particularly unique member of the fairy folk of the Isle of Man, and one of the better ones to encounter, despite appearances. If you enjoyed that little story, then why not go check out the Mythological episode on fairies, which we recorded in 2023, where we talk about fairy folklore from Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and Anglo-Saxon England. And of course, if you want to hit the subscribe and like buttons, comment or share to keep the algorithm happy, then we would really appreciate it. Thank you again for listening, and join us next time as we continue this little tour of the British Isles. See you then.